Good afternoon. My name is Rebecca Costa. I'm 15 years old, and I attend the American School of Milan. I'm introducing why making the oceans and wild seafood more abundant is possible, and why doing so is the next big opportunity for us as a population. I love fish, and I highly recommend you try some in a seafood restaurant while you're here in Italy. Seafood is a source of protein for many people worldwide, and the oceans are full of opportunity for us as a population. Although we have already caused much damage due to overfishing and pollution, we are currently working on solutions and have already put a great deal of effort in rebuilding global fish stocks. Biological rest periods should be implemented worldwide during specific parts of a species' life cycle. During these rest periods, it is prohibited to fish in particular areas, and it is meant to allow stocks to grow to a size that is compatible with the current fishing activity. Furthermore, the limiting of fishing of immature fish, young fish smaller than pre-established fishing sizes, would make a significant impact on the stock's increase. A problem that occurs frequently worldwide is the problem of microplastics, which are appearing in the environment. Microplastics are fragments of plastic smaller than 5 millimeters in length, and the fish consume them because they mistake them as food. It is important that we work on cleaning not just large pieces of plastic, trash, and oil, but also the microplastics, which work their way through the food chain and are eventually eaten by us humans. We are fully capable of rebuilding global fish stocks to the point that we will be able to feed 1 billion people worldwide daily. However, this will take a lot of work if we want to ensure that our needs are supported by the ocean as our population continues to grow. I look forward to hearing more about how we can restore healthy aquatic ecosystems in our bid to feed the world. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Andy Sharpless. I'm going to introduce briefly my colleagues here. I'm going to then speak briefly to give an overview, and then we're going to run down from briefly presentations across the panel here, and then we will have at least half an hour for questions and discussions with all of you. So this should be an interactive and good talk together. To my left, Rashid Sumaila, Distinguished International Professor of Fisheries Economics at the University of British Columbia and head of the Fisheries Center there, a world-leading fishery economist and expert on the status of the world's oceans, also Oceana board member. In the middle here, Susan Rockefeller, board member at Stone Barns, and also board member at Oceana, artist, ocean advocate, and widely knowledgeable about many things sustainable and very, very committed to ocean conservation and knowledgeable thereon. Farther away from all of us here, Alexandra Cousteau, senior advisor to Oceana, ocean advocate, ocean expert, granddaughter to the famous Cousteau that many of us learned to love the oceans through. All right, this is our panel today, and I'm going to start off. We want you to understand a basic concept here called Save the Oceans, Feed the World. And the essence of this idea is that nobody understands and appreciates the role that a rebuilt ocean can play in feeding a hungry world. The hungriness of the world is widely understood. Sustainable Development Goal number 2 focuses on that. If you are at all aware of the status of the world's people right now, you will know that nearly 1 billion people already are hungry, and we are headed to a planet with 2 billion more. In the middle case of the population growth forecast, we're at more than 9 billion people, 2 China's worth more than we have right now. In that context, you are not hearing about how ocean fish could help feed all those people. You are not. And that is a big opportunity lost. Why are you not hearing that happen? Because this is what the data shows. This data shows the world fish catch from about 1972 until 1996, at which point, what happened? the world's fish catch began to decline. And people who know this data and extend it forward say, well, of course we can't feed a hungry planet with fewer and fewer fish. So that's why this whole conversation in the world leaves this enormous resource out. Now, this is a problem, and it's a huge missed opportunity, and it is the message of this discussion today. This forecast does not need to occur. We know how to rebuild ocean abundance to a higher level than it has ever been seen and to sustain that catch forever. And the difference in terms of human meals in the middle of this century is enormous. We rebuild the oceans, we can feed more than 1 billion people a healthy seafood meal forever. And we are headed for about half that number if we allow business as usual to proceed. We are not going to get there on the path we're on, but we know how to turn this around, and that's what we're going to show you today. How do you turn it around? You do 3 simple things. You stop overfishing, you curb pollution, and you increase transparency. You reduce illegal fishing by deterring it, by putting it into the public view. The most important of these 3 is stopping overfishing. Therefore, I'm going to break that down into 3 additional points. Set and enforce scientific quotas, reduce and protect key habitat areas, and then reduce bycatch. Now, will this work? You are wondering. Here's some data that will reassure you. The catch of the Atlantic redfish from 1959 until now, shown in the vertical axis in biomass. This is the weight of all of the creatures in the water. What happened? Overfishing of enormous proportions. Finally, the public managers enforced some sensible policies. What do you think will happen now? That's what happened. That's what happened. This is history. The fish came back. Here's another example. Haddock on the Georges Bank, 1960 until now, overfished. Decades of mismanagement. Finally, the policymakers intervene, put fishing limits in. What happens? The fish come back. Here's another example. Atlantic cod, not the famous Canadian cod, but their cousins across the Atlantic. Here we have biomass from 46 till now, decades of overfishing and mismanagement. Finally, the policymakers intervene. What happens? The fish come back. You can see this all over the world. There's more data on this chart than you can absorb, but there are overfishing events followed by policy interventions and followed by rebounds. That's why we can do this. That's why we can forecast a future in which there are more fish. Now, the second reason we can do this is that this achievement does not require international cooperation and all of the difficulties that is showing in the climate arena. The most productive parts of the world's oceans are the pink ones here, the coastal areas, and they were nationalized in the 70s and 80s under the law of the sea. So ocean conservation can be done country by country. And now you will ask the question, how many countries have to do this? And I will answer it for you. What share of the world's fish catch can you fix if just 9 countries and the European Union will do their jobs? 2/3. What share of the world's fish catch will you get to the future if 29 countries and the European Union do their jobs? 90%. Country by country, we can save the oceans and feed 1 billion people in the middle of the century. And we can solve nutrition issues. Micronutrients that come from fish are an essential part of a widely recognized problem that the future faces. 629 million people right now are reliant on fish and are at risk of micronutrient deficiency. 75% of those 629 million people live in just 6 countries. Here they are. Many of those countries are also in the countries where lots and lots, the top fish catching countries of the world. So there's an intersection here in terms of the agenda of helping micronutrient deficient and hungry people and just increasing the global fish catch. When you do this, you get many benefits. Your doctor, she will tell you, stop eating so much red meat, eat some more fish, and you will be healthier. You will also see benefits from the cost of the animal protein to humanity. This shows you the cost of these different forms of livestock. What you want is fish to be on the right. There it is. It also brings benefits in fresh water. Fresh water is increasingly reduced in the world. Here's the different demands that livestock production places on it. You want fish to be on the right. Where will it be? You're talking about marine fish, you're saying to yourself. So you're right. It's a 0. How about land? Land. Livestock needs a lot of land. Wild ocean fish, not so much. Now we get to greenhouse gas. Methane emissions from livestock are a big driver of greenhouse gas emissions in the world, one of the most important. This is the contribution that different livestock make. You want wild ocean fish to be not so important. There they are. All these benefits from rebuilding the ocean. I defy you to come up with another intervention that we can make which produces so many contributions to so many global problems in such a practical and achievable way. Climate change, human hunger, human nutrition, human health, biodiversity, freshwater, land. I wrote a book with Suzanne Evans. There are some copies in the back. We'll have just about enough for all of you as you leave. Thank you for coming. Now, I want to show you a little bit more about how we get this done, and then we're going to go to the panel. Oceana has teams of people in those countries shown on this slide. So we have Filipinos in the Philippines, Brazilians in Brazil, and so forth. Their job is to pass national laws that fix the oceans. Here's a story of success in Brazil. These guys, the Tanyan fishermen, the artisanal fishermen, were threatened by bottom trawlers who were working along the coast of Rio Grande do Sul, the southernmost state of Brazil. It's like the Alaska of Brazil, the most important part of its fishery. And you can see in the heat map here, those little yellow and those red colors, that's bottom trawling. Bottom trawling is when you drag a heavily weighted net along the bottom of the ocean. It's like clear cutting the bottom of the ocean. Those guys that I showed you a moment ago were threatened by these guys. Those guys using nets knew that their future was being wrecked by these bottom trawlers. They went together with us to the state parliament and the governor of Rio Grande do Sul, and in December of just a few months ago, a ban was passed forbidding the bottom trawling in that huge state, 630 kilometers north to south, 20 kilometers east to west, and an area equal to traveling from San Francisco to the Oregon border if you're an American, now protected from the bottom trawlers that are out there dragging those huge nets along the bottom. We did it by organizing the fishermen, by organizing the scientists, by teaching everybody that they had the authority to do that at that state level, by doing a social media campaign. Here are the fishermen standing up, protesting on behalf of the conservation outcome of banning bottom trawls. These are our allies in the fishing community going to their politicians, standing up with us. Parliament passes the law unanimously. The governor signs it. And this shows you, in this next map, I'm going to show you the change. So you're looking at Rio Grande do Sul. Understand how big this is, 630 kilometers north to south. The trawlers have been ripping up the coastal zone. That zone is now protected. That green line shows you the area that they are now forbidden from entering. We have bottom trawling victories all over the world. This is where our teams have achieved them. I'm not going to take the time to describe them, but this is a big battle all over the world. In Belize, we protected the entire EEZ of Belize. 40% of the second largest reef in the world is in that EEZ, now protected against bottom trawling. In the Philippines, every single coastal zone all around all those islands is now protected against bottom trawling. In Europe, huge victories were made together with many allies here in stopping bottom trawling off the west coast of America, big stops on bottom trawling. Here we are in Chile, 98% of its EEZ protected against bottom trawling. Evidence of progress that the world can believe will make the oceans abundant. Transparency. Remember I talked about 3 objectives. Stop overfishing, reduce pollution, and increase transparency. You are looking at something nobody in the world could have even seen until about 2 years ago. It is a heat map of 70,000 of the world's largest fishing vessels as identified to satellites around the world and mapped to a Google map and provided to the world for free. You can leave this room and today go to Global Fishing Watch and see the current image that this shows you of the world's commercial fishing fleets as they fish all over the world in near real time. We built this tool together with Google and SkyTruth. It's called Global Fishing Watch. Here is the fishing fleet in action, and from February 2018 onwards for a month, fishing off the coast of West Africa. You're going to hear more about West Africa from Rashid. And you can see the EEZs of these countries, and you can see fishing occurring inside and outside the EEZs of these countries. And you can see the identifiers of the names of the fleet. So on the right-hand side, you see the different colors showing you which countries those different boats are coming from. And you can see a lot of Chinese boats, by the way. Here's an example of a protection event. This is a protected area in the red box. It was declared off fishing. We wondered whether it really happened. Look what happened. The protected area was actually protected. Here's that same protected area after everybody else had left, and we're watching a particular boat, the Marshall's 2000, come in, transit. Oh, look. It looks like they're fishing over there in the corner. This tool allowed the government of Kiribati, that it owns this water and that declared this protected, to take this very image to the owners of the Kiribati. And you can see in Global Fishing Watch, we provide the flag state, the name of the boat, the IMO number, the identifiers, and confront them for their illegal activity, and they paid a fine, which in that year was equal to a substantial percentage of the entire GNP of the country of Kiribati. So illegal fishing can be confronted. Transparency will work. It is working. Do not believe that this can't be handled. It is being handled and can be handled. $2 million fine, 1% of the GNP. Now, here's a big image again of the coast of, west coast of South America. And you can see how, I'm sorry, I forget what the purpose of that last image was, so we skipped over that one. Now we're going to Tanyan Strait. This is the last victory I want to talk about. Tanyan Strait is an interior sea in the Philippines. And you're looking at a close-up here of 2 islands in the Philippines, which between them have a long strait called the Tanyan Strait, which is the largest interior strait in the Philippines. And it was declared a protected area about 20 years ago. And no protection was delivered. So it was a familiar story of a paper park, where the press release looks great, and there's no actual increase in protection being delivered. Oceana, working with our allies, has now won real protections for this park, and the government is actually enforcing against the illegal fishers. Here's the data on the actual enforcement actions that have been taken by the Marine Police and the Navy of the Philippines. That's the kind of evidence that will save the ocean and that countries can take in their self-interest if they are prodded by groups like Oceana. So I want you to understand 3 things. I've talked about how we can rebuild the oceans by doing 3 things: set and enforcing scientific quotas, reducing pollution, and requiring transparency. And I've shown you success stories in Brazil and in the Philippines and in a global scale on Global Fishing Watch. The happy punchline to the end of the Tanyan Strait story, which we don't yet have in a scientific peer-reviewed paper, is that the local fishers report enormous increases in the catch, thanks to the fact that the Tanyan Strait is no longer being illegally fished by big boats. That's Oceana in a very quick nutshell. I'm going to now go to brief presentations by each of our other panelists, and then we're going to invite your questions and answers. And I think you're next, Rashid, is that right?
Yeah. So thank you very much, Andy, and thank you guys for coming. There's a lot happening outside. You came here because you care about fish, right? So I have 5 minutes, and I prepared 5 slides very quickly. So to add a little bit more, where are my slides? To add a little more to what Andy has said. So I'll be talking about the value of fish and fisheries, the importance of this to not only food security, but also human security. So this is your first slide. Lots of information in here. In the first place, we take a lot of fish out of the ocean year in, year out. The estimate is about, you had 94 million tons a year. If you convert that to the number of mature cows, that's about 100 million mature cows that we pull out of the ocean each year. You know, when you see the little fish, you don't really realize how much biomass we take out. 100 million mature cows is more than all the cows we slaughter globally a year. The ocean provides that to us almost for free, right? And that generates about $150 billion a year. And if you take all the added value, that's about 450, $500 billion a year that is pumped into the economy. Now, this graph is about the jobs. Our estimate is that about 260 million people around the world draw some income from ocean fisheries. And that graph there shows you the 10 top countries where these jobs are. And they are in large developing countries. And to me, this is the biggest service the ocean provides us, you know, keeping young people, 260 million of them busy in these large developing countries. Without those jobs, there will be real trouble, right? I understand President Obama gave a talk here 2 years ago or so. And I gave a talk after him in 2016, and I said, if not for this job, he would have been grayer. You remember how fast he became gray? He would have been grayer if these young people had nothing to do. And not only him, all of you. So this is huge. That's at the global level. Now, when we go down to West Africa, this is a graph that quickly tells you a story. The official data we get from governments and from the FAO usually underestimate the total amount of fish taken, because this is mainly commercial fish. But there's a lot of fish taken by artisanal people, which is really important in the household. This is fish people actually take home and feed their family. And actually, a lot of women do this kind of small-scale fishing, and so it's important for gender also in West Africa, which is a big thing. In fact, women are very prominent in the fishing sector. If you think of Ghana, the financing is all done by women and the processing and so on. So we need to count the fish that we take out properly, both to make sure we account for it, social and economic importance, but also so we know enough to be able to take care of the ocean, which is the source of this good stuff that we want. Yeah, so the official data is only about a quarter if you take in everything that we take from the ocean in West Africa. So that's something to know. Now, here is a few more things. Many people really depend on fish in this part of the world. And in fact, the coastal people, probably it's only fish they have as animal protein in their diet. I like to say that fish is something that is good for rich people and also very important for poor people in developing countries, both in Asia, Latin America, and Africa. Because if you have a good day in Milano or in Vancouver or New York, one of the things you do, you go out and eat good seafood, right? But in these parts of the world, that is the only animal protein they have. Creates a lot of jobs, but there is problem. We are seeing declines, and we are also seeing a lot of illegal fishing, as alluded to by Andy. So we need to take care of our ocean better. Now, this is a few on Ghana specifically. Ghana is an important West African country. Lots of coastal people, about 12,000 artisanal canoes operate in the waters of Ghana, employing lots of people, 200,000. And you know, there are many dependents on each of these fishes. So it goes into lots of hundreds of thousands of people, and there are canoes landing fish all over. And giving people livelihood, food security, and so on, generating money, contributes 4.5 to the GDP, and employs about 10% of the population. So Europeans, you know about what is happening in West Africa. People have to be able to live where they are, otherwise they move, right? People are people. We don't sit and die in a place. So it is in our own interest, Europeans and non-Europeans and Africans, to take good care of this. And I mentioned the gender dimension to this already. And this is an important part to have in mind in terms of education of children and taking care of families. Now, talking about illegal fishing, this is a paper I published late last year, where I calculated the losses to countries in West Africa. And you can see Ghana loses almost 100,000 tons of fish, and Nigeria about 200,000, and the whole of the West African region, the map I showed you, about 800,000. So this 800,000 tons of fish is actually about 800,000 mature cows the region is losing through illegal fishing, whether it's Chinese boats or sometimes European boats taking the fish illegally and shipping them out. And this leads to a lot of revenue lost, about $1.2 billion for the region, which is a lot of money for this region where money is really needed to keep people alive and living. So this is my last slide. So for all these reasons, we need to conserve, we need to rebuild, and rebuilding is possible, and we need to sustain. In addition to the points Andy mentioned, we need to deal with climate change because, as we may get to go in the discussion, countries in the tropics are being hit hard by climate change. When they don't pollute so much as those of us living in the north, you know, the CO2 per capita is very low. They depend on fish more than we do, so it's just a moral, ethical, and economic reason why we should deal with climate change. We need to take away harmful subsidies. We heard about that in the last session. Harmful subsidies lead to overcapacity and the destruction of a very important resource, so that we need to do. In fact, if we do things properly, I like to call fish infinity fish, because fish can continue to give you benefits through time, and mathematically, even if you get a small benefit and it goes to infinity, the benefits are infinity. So fish is infinity fish in terms of benefit. We need to keep this going. And technology comes into play. We can talk about that. Andy has already shown you how technology can help in us in having transparency and keeping the fish going. Thank you very much. Next. Yeah.
So I have 5 minutes to speak. I am going to be using my notes so that I do not go longer than my 5-minute limit. I just want to say I am so proud to be a board member of Oceana, because what we do, we truly save the oceans and we can feed the world, and it is solvable. It is solvable in our lifetime. So it's a really hopeful thought, and it's an incredible organization, and I'm just really proud to be here and supporting the work of Rashid and Andy and Alexandra. So the other thing, I want to thank Seeds&Chips for actually putting the oceans and fish on the food table. I think we're one of the only organizations here that's actually talking about fish as a solution to feeding the poor and the most vulnerable. So hopefully we'll have more opportunities to continue this conversation. What I wanted to do was say a few words about the relationship between healthy seas and healthy soils as a board member of both Oceana and Stone Barns Center for Food and Agriculture. At Stone Barns, and I don't know how many were at the last panel, but we advocate for a healthier food system, and we are a center for agricultural innovation with the genius of Chef Dan Barber, and working with scientists, breeders, and farmers on a no-waste model of farming, and the creation of delicious food. We know that agriculture can mitigate and protect against climate change effects through low-till farming practices and building soil health that helps with water retention and provides more nutrient-dense and tasty food as well. At Stone Barns, we work to build a sustainable food system through experimentation with rotational crops, seed breeding, and innovative ways to preserve and use all parts of the animals and plants on the farm. Stone Barns' mission, in collaboration with Dan and David Barber, is to change the way Americans eat and farm, which is squarely positioned to help address some of the most urgent crises of our time. By demonstrating resilient agriculture, training young farmers, fostering a farm-centric food culture, and activating the next generation of food citizens, we are changing the conversation about the promise and the potential of regenerative agriculture. So now let me talk about the connection between soil health and ocean health. Regenerative agriculture helps the environment and the ocean. It minimizes runoff of fertilizers and pesticides and runoff that can impact our rivers and oceans. Regenerative farming results in less waste that can find its way into the oceans, and carbon sequestration from low-till practices can lessen ocean acidification. In a no-waste system, there is a saying, nose to tail, which means that all of the animal is used, not just the prime cut. And the same is true of all the plants in a crop rotation. All are used in inventive ways in gastronomy and farming at Stone Barns. Oceana's efforts to save the oceans and feed the world are a natural pairing with our work at Stone Barns, because both organizations are working to build a future that ensures that we manage wisely our ocean and farm ecosystems. We both work to minimize waste on land and on sea. Oceana works to minimize bycatch, which Andy spoke about, which accounts for 10 to 25% of fish that are just discarded back into the ocean because they are considered marginal and of no value. Stone Barns, since its inception, has been focused on the elimination of food waste, and this focus on food waste highlights a key challenge in the quest to feed 9 billion people by 2050. Oceana uses science-based data to enforce fishing regulations, minimize bycatch, and protect fish habitat. And as Andy said, when we create a better system for managing wild seafood, it has very positive effects and impacts for climate change and preserving fresh water, just as a more farm-centric regenerative food culture does. The first challenge for us is to reimagine wild seafood on our food table and on our plates. Wild seafood has been ignored as a valuable source of protein, perhaps because for many of us, the oceans were about beautiful images and creatures like those portrayed by Jacques Cousteau, Alexandra's grandfather. Oceana has a mission to save the ocean and feed the world. And yes, we believe in biodiverse and beautiful oceans, because many of us have come to love their beaches and rocky shores and swim in their waves and saw images of the oceans that the Calypso brought so vividly to us and inspired us with wonder and awe and a desire to protect these magnificent oceans and the sea creatures living there. So I'm very honored to be on this panel with Alexandra, because I grew up with those images and those shows, and it was a big part of my love of the ocean and then my desire to protect them. So thank you. But what we also know is that around the world, the key opportunity for the oceans is to keep them abundant, so that they can feed the hundreds of millions of people who depend upon them for their protein and their livelihoods, much of what Rashid was talking about just now. It is our last wild resource that, if managed well, is the answer to healthy protein for billions of people. Oceana's hope and vision is that we can work together to have wild seafood a more abundant option on the table for billions of people who rely on it. Because as Andy said, it is better for the planet, it is better for our freshwater resources, and it is better for human and planetary health. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Hello, everyone. It's good to be here with you today, and thank you, Susan, Rashid, and Andy, for sharing your thoughts about the oceans. I'm going to share slightly more personal thoughts because I think it's interesting to be able to reflect backwards a little bit as we consider where we're going in the future. And my whole life has been about the oceans. Ever since I was little, I went on my first expedition when I was just 6 months old. And so it's been something I've had a lot of time to think about. And I see things in a generational perspective. So when I look back to the 1950s, when my grandfather started to think about his life after the French Navy and started to think about where he wanted to go and was passionate about storytelling and filmmaking and the oceans, he wanted to be able to go deeper and stay longer underwater. And so he invented scuba diving, and he invented underwater cameras and underwater lights and brought those images that Susan was referring to people around the world, inspiring them with awe and wonder and a desire to explore themselves. And that was really the first time we ever saw what was under the surface of the ocean. And the glimpse of that ocean was one of abundance and full of life and biodiverse, an ocean that could sustain people, sustain itself, and was rich. My father grew up on expedition, and so by the time he was a young man in the 60s, he was already seeing the degradation of the oceans, and alarmed, started to articulate what, at least in the Western world, was the first idea of conservation, that the oceans have intrinsic value and should be protected for their own sake and for the abundance that lies within. At that time, the oceans were still mostly abundant, and so conserving it made sense. It was the right approach. But over the past few decades, we've lost so much of that blue natural capital, and I think we've come to a point where we need to start talking together about a vision of the future where we are able to rebuild abundance and restore our oceans. That is what will take us back to the abundance that my grandfather knew, and our ability to feed more people and provide not just for humans, but for life in the oceans. So that vision is something that I think, that vision of abundance is something that I think we should talk about as the organizing concept that can bring us together in a solutions pathway to the future where we see abundance not just in the ocean, but on land as well, in our food systems, in our agriculture, for the world that we want to leave to our children. And that idea can unite us across different systems so that we can get there. But I want to actually mention a few things before we open up questions to the audience, because I think that what I've noticed here, I think we all mentioned it together earlier, was that wild seafood isn't really a topic at Seeds and Chips, which was surprising to me because it is kind of an obvious thing to include when we talk about feeding the world in a sustainable way into the future. So I wanted to ask you, Susan, what are your thoughts about why wild seafood isn't more of the conversation in the food world?
So, you know, I think obviously you think about Seeds and Chips, and the orientation has been terrestrial, land-based, and I just don't think that people think about the fact that, you know, each country has this 200-mile limit. They think of sort of the land is where the parameters of their countries end, instead of extending it into the fact that we have this 200-mile limit that is each country's right to fish and preserve these resources. So I think there's a somewhat of a misunderstanding that they don't really think about fish as an important component of how to feed the billion people that rely on it. But I also think it's misunderstood that people think it's overfished and that we will not be able to solve the problem of bringing back the abundance. So I think that it just hasn't really been in the consciousness of a lot of the food system professionals. So frankly, I'm thrilled that we're here and thrilled that we can talk about science-based ways that we can actually bring back ocean abundance country by country, which Andy talked about. But I do think it's a psychological thing. I think we understand our relationship to what we can manipulate in terms of domesticated livestock and ways that we've worked on agriculture on land. And not that many people, unless they're fishermen, relate to fish as a food protein. So I think it's really a psychological issue in addition to just a focus on terrestrial land-based agriculture.
That is a really important message. I feel like I'm in an airport and I'm trying to have a conversation and they're announcing a gate.
Thank you.
All right. To that point, how do people know if they're eating the right fish? Andy, you wrote a book about this, so you have deep knowledge and can advise everybody. Like, what fish do we eat and what fish do we not eat, and how can our personal choices help to restore that abundance?
So the simple advice I have for everybody here who wants to be responsible in choosing your fish is eat the rabbits, not the lions. In the think about the fish choices that you make as being high on the food web in the ocean or low on the food web of the ocean, and very commonsensically, the things that are low, the sardines, the herring, the anchovies are like rabbits. They reproduce easily and frequently, and if you eat those, you are very likely to be eating something that's abundant. If you eat the tuna, the swordfish, the sharks, guess what? They're like lions and tigers. They reproduce slowly. Oh, we have more announcements coming. Can you hear me if I talk? You can, okay. So, a simple rule that we came up with at Oceana is use the word will. Wild, local, small, and shellfish, wills, okay? And you can do well in your choices.
The other thing you can do is go to the Monterey Bay Aquarium has a fantastic app, and it can help you choose what fish are more abundant, and it's a worthwhile app to take a look at as well.
And the good thing about whales is that by eating those small fish, you avoid the chance of taking in a lot of pollutants, because the large fish is actually taking a lot of pollutants, and we're polluting the ocean a lot. You eat a lot of tunas, you are going to end up with more mercury than you really need. So it's not good for your health also.
Thank you, Rashid. And actually, I wanted to ask you about climate change, because I don't think we can have a conversation about the environment or the oceans without mentioning climate change. And Andy, you mentioned that wild fish are low in greenhouse gases. But how does climate change impact the importance of properly managing our oceans?
Yeah, this is huge. Climate change is a big one, and as we all know. And in terms of climate change and the relationship with how well you manage your ocean, two key points. Number one, if you manage your oceans well and you get hit by climate change, the chances are that you have a better chance of surviving. Think of two people, one is not healthy and starts off not healthy, one is very healthy, and you are hit by a flu, the one who is healthy is likely to withstand that. So that is one key way to think of climate change. Another thing is that a healthy living ocean actually sequesters a lot of the CO2 we pump out. I mean, fish moving up and down actually do this. I was at Oxford one summer and we worked together on trying to estimate the amount of carbon that large fish take down the ocean in the high seas and calculated the value. The value in terms of the carbon they save was about 10 times the value that we get if we catch the fish and eat them. So you need a good ocean, living ocean, to absorb some of the carbon cheaply, and you also need a solid ocean in order to withstand the impact of climate change. Two quick ones.
Thanks, Rashid. I want to make sure that we have time for questions. Does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
Hi there. I wanted to get your thoughts on aquaculture and fish farms, as more and more are popping up that are claiming to be super sustainable because of the depletion of the wild populations. But what's the ultimate balance, I guess, of, we know that climate change is affecting wild populations and we're overfishing. Should we switch to high quality farmed for now and until we can focus? Or I guess, what are the approaches? Because I work in corporate dining and we order large volumes of fish, and we want to make sure that we're ordering the more sustainable option to help the side of the business that's trying to do the right thing.
I love this question. Thank you very much. Simple and important answer for you. Know what the fish that is being farmed is eating. Understand that, and then you will be far along the way toward understanding which kind of fish you should buy and which kind of fish you should not. The fish that eat fish, you should not buy. What's an example of that? Salmon. If you are buying farmed salmon, you are buying an animal that, when it's farmed, is being fed wild fish while it's in the pen. And in that process, they're feeding about 3 pounds of wild fish in to get 1 pound of farmed salmon out. So they are actually reducing, those salmon farmers are, the amount of wild seafood that humanity has to eat. They are a customer for wild fish, and they grind them up into dog food-like particles, they feed them to the salmon, and they reduce the amount of seafood that humanity has available to it. So don't eat farmed salmon, don't buy that. At the other good end is the clams, mussels, and oysters. Those farmers are doing something entirely good for the planet. They are making a healthy animal protein, seafood, out of basically algae, because those are filter feeders, and they're filtering algae, turning it into seafood that's good for us. And also, those farmers are incredibly strong allies in the battle against ocean pollution, because you can't farm in a polluted ocean. So there are businesses that help stand up against ocean. In the middle, in the kind of yellow case, so we've got a red case and a green case, in the middle are the animals that are fed grain. What's an example of that? Catfish or tilapia. And they're basically chicken farms underwater. And they have all of the problems and the benefits of chicken farms. Now, whenever I answer this question, people come up to me sometimes very angrily from both sides and say, you're being too tough on the tilapia farmer, and other people saying you're being too easy on the tilapia farmer. If you want that version of the answer, I'll speak to you afterwards. But I actually recently got very angrily dressed down by a donor who thought I was too nice to the tilapia farmers. So I will give you more nuance on that than this general audience will like. But that's the quick answer.
Yeah, I was just saying, the other thing is that if you exclude China from the equation, wild-caught fish still make up 2/3 of the seafood that's consumed globally. So it's interesting to look at, aquaculture in relation to China and all other parts of the world.
Yeah, so to add to both of them, in general, I think, and many of you are investors, so this is important to you, I hope. I think people are very pessimistic about wild fish and over-optimistic about aquaculture. That is my take on this. Why? Because large-scale industrial aquaculture started not long ago, actually. If you look at the graph of production of aqua, it's like this, and then in the 80s, it starts to go. Wild fish, we started fishing around the 80s, 50s, like you showed. So people see the recent growth and think agriculture can continue forever. I don't think so. I think there's over-optimism and we need to watch it. In fact, we have a paper, it's almost ready to go to submit, and it is going to be fun. The title of the paper is Agriculture Over-Optimism, so watch out for it. Agriculture and then to hang up to your point, China alone currently produces 60% of world agriculture. If you add on Asia, that's 90%. The rest of the world has only 10%. Europe contributes 4%. Africa, Latin America, almost nothing. So there is also a social and economic reason why we shouldn't think agriculture can do it, looking at the history. That means a small country like Guinea-Bissau that doesn't have money to buy medicine for their kids will have to buy fish from China in order to feed their people. Can you imagine that? So it's just crazy to even think of this. One last statistics. I told you China alone produces 60% of agriculture. Wild fish, 201 countries produce 60% of wild agriculture. So it's spread, it's all over the place. More people can enjoy it from coast to coast rather than just concentrated agriculture in only China. Yeah.
Thank you, Rashid. Are there any more questions? Yes.
Hi there. Thanks so much for raising the question of climate change. I was just wondering if there's any kind of inbuilt assumption around the scenario that we're looking at, because we know that even with 1.5 degrees of warming, which is only just physically possible, we're only going to be able to conserve 10% of coral reefs, which are the nurseries of the fish that we rely upon. So is there, if we're heading towards a 3 or 4 degree world, which with the Paris Agreement we are, what kind of chance do we have of rescuing those species dependent on their nurseries?
So this is such an important question. I'm glad you've come back to it. 2 or 3 points, and then I'm sure the other panelists will want to add. We assumed a 1.5 or 2 degree kind of world in that forecast. We did not go all the way to 3 or 4. And number one. Number two, the reefs are in big trouble, and they are threatened from acidification and from warming. The reefs are home to the most biodiverse places in the ocean, but they are not home to the most productive. Cold water places tend to be the most productive. So if you're just worried about feeding humanity, you can actually survive the loss of the reefs. I don't want to lose the reefs. It's a terrible thing from biodiversity perspective, and it's a terrible thing from the people who live close to them and will rely on them for food. But on the global perspective as a system basis, the oceans can be very productive post-reefs. Strange to say. It's not what you think. But like we talked about in Brazil, the southern cold water part in Brazil, the Alaskans, 35% of the American Ocean, which is one of the most productive oceans in the world, is Alaska. The most productive part of Brazil is all the way down there in the bottom in the cold water. South Africa is a really important, productive part of the African continent's oceans. So the cold water places tend to be more productive. I can talk about the biology of that if you wish later on. And then the last point is that in comparing terrestrial ecosystems from which we eat a lot of food and ocean ecosystems from which we can eat some food, and you think about their relative adaptiveness to the challenge that you just asked about, of 3 or 4 degrees Celsius increase, I would bet on the oceans. Because the animals in the oceans are inherently more flexible and adaptive than terrestrial systems are. They swim, after all. And so it's going to be bad for everybody, and I don't recommend that the world test this theory, but if I had to bet on one part of nature to be able to survive a horrible climate event, it would be the oceans.
You want to say something?
I just want to say, and I just want to say that's why, and I'm sort of making a pitch here to support Oceana, because I just feel like we are doing the work that needs to be done to deal with food security issues, and it is a solvable, hopeful, like we can be hopeful when we think about saving the oceans, and I feel like we're doing such great work. And for any of you that have not gone to our website, it's just oceana.org, and there's something called Wave Makers, and you can sign up, and you will get information on all the things that we're talking about. And you'll get something into your inbox, you'll learn about what we're doing globally, and you can also take action. We also have a Blue Living page on plastic pollution and ways that you can break free from plastic and other sort of hopeful activations that each of our country leaders are doing with regard to plastic pollution and also all the other initiatives that we're involved with.
And
This is wonderful. Yeah, So if you take the two comments together, one thing, I get questions from journalists that ask me whether I'm optimistic or pessimistic. I think your question can be boiled down to that. And my answer usually is, what option do I have? I don't have any option to be pessimistic. I have to keep on being optimistic. The question we all need to ask ourselves is, what can we do, either collectively or individually, to improve the situation? Because otherwise we're just going to hell, right? You don't want to do that. So let's keep the optimism. Let's keep doing what we can do. There are examples all over. Vote, and also check out your parliamentarians. Put pressure to move the world in a better direction, because there's no option. Yeah.
thank you. And that's all we